Every Thursday at precisely 3:30, Daniel would park his car beside the faded blue dumpster behind the Valley Inn. The motel wasn't glamorous. Its neon sign flickered even on the sunniest days, and the paint peeled from its wooden railings like secrets trying to escape. But room 216, tucked at the far end of the second floor, was the only place where he felt something close to real. His name was Daniel. He was a father, a husband, a man who had spent years living the kind of life people envied from the outside. A good job in furniture design, a well-mannered wife named Elaine, who hosted garden parties in the spring and never forgot to iron his shirts on Sunday nights. A brick house with white shutters, everything in its place, except for one thing. In that motel room, every week, Daniel met a man he didn't know. He didn't know his name, never asked, never offered his own. They didn't speak, they didn't text. No last names, no phone calls, no photos, just silence, flesh, breathing, leaving. The first time Daniel went, he told himself it was about curiosity. The second time, he said it was stress. By the fourth time, there were no excuses left, only the dull, gnawing ache in his chest that didn't go away unless he was in that room. They never kissed. They never held each other afterward. Sometimes, the man read a book while waiting for him. Other times, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window like he, too, was trying to forget something. Daniel never dared to sit too close at first. There were rules, unspoken, but understood. He learned them the way a child learns not to touch fire, not through instruction, but from the heat. At home, Elaine would greet him with her usual soft smile. She'd ask about the office, about deadlines, about the cracked tiles in the kitchen that needed fixing. Daniel answered every question. He poured wine. He complimented her dress. He held her as they fell asleep in their shared bed. But the truth was, every Thursday, he disappeared into a version of himself he never allowed to exist anywhere else. He told himself it wasn't cheating. He told himself he was still a good man, until one afternoon, months in, as he reached for his shirt on the motel floor, Daniel paused. The sunlight hit the side of the man's face in a way he hadn't seen before. His jaw softened. His eyelashes caught the light. Something in Daniel's chest shifted. That night, when Elaine touched his hand across the dinner table, Daniel flinched. It wasn't guilt that burned his throat. It was grief. For a feeling he didn't understand. For someone he wasn't allowed to miss. For a man he didn't even know. He had never spoken a word to him. But on that Thursday, Daniel realized he never wanted to leave room 216 again. There was no going back after that. What would you do? If the most honest part of your life was the one you had to hide the most. This is Heart Stories, real emotions, true silence, and the kind of love that never speaks its name. Follow us to discover what happens when Daniel returns to room 216 and finds the silence louder than ever. The first message Daniel ever saw was short. It was buried on a private thread in a forgotten corner of the internet, tucked between spam ads and strangers screaming into the void. The title read simply, Thursday, room 216. No talking, no names, just quiet. He clicked it out of curiosity. He showed up out of something else. The first meeting lasted less than an hour. He had knocked, unsure, ready to turn back, but the door had opened immediately. The man inside gave no expression, only a nod. Stepping aside, the room smelled like clean sheets and old cigarettes. The blinds were already drawn. They never shook hands, never even said hello. But by the time Daniel walked back to his car, something inside him felt realigned. He told himself it was nothing, just an escape, a room to leave everything behind. That first visit turned into a second, then a third. A pattern formed, and with every Thursday, Daniel fell deeper into something he couldn't name. The man was older than him, maybe mid-40s, clean cut, always freshly shaved. He wore plainclothes slacks, sometimes a collared shirt, never anything flashy. His hands were broad and veined. There was a thin scar near his left wrist, the kind you don't ask about. He always arrived early. He always left after Daniel. Sometimes he brought a paperback novel and read until Daniel entered. Other times he looked out the window, quiet as the air conditioner humming beside them. Daniel began to notice things. The man had a habit of adjusting the lamp, turning it slightly away from the bed. He always folded the blanket over once before sitting down. He never touched Daniel unless invited. But when he did, it was with a kind of precision that felt almost rehearsed. There were boundaries. Never a kiss, never an embrace afterward, no questions, no eye contact unless necessary. But beneath all of that silence, something unspoken began to swell. Daniel started keeping a journal. He never wrote the man's name. He didn't have one. Instead, he called him Jay. It wasn't based on anything, just a letter, but it felt right. In his entries, Daniel tried to make sense of it. Jay has a new book today. Black cover. I think it's poetry. He keeps his thumb tucked inside the page when I walk in. He never looks up right away. I think he's giving me the chance to leave if I want to. I don't know why I come back every week. I'm not in love. It's not romantic. I'm not gay. But when Jay puts his hand on my back, I feel like I can breathe. The more Daniel wrote, the more fragmented his inner world became. During the day, he played the role of husband, father, executive. He sat through meetings about material quality and pricing logistics. He listened to Elaine talk about her garden, her Pilates class, her sister's new baby, but his mind always drifted to that room, to that man. He started noticing when Jay didn't trim his nails, when he looked more tired than usual. Once, Daniel arrived early, saw Jay resting against the windowsill, his eyes closed, as if he'd been waiting for something that might never arrive. Daniel felt the pull of connection, raw, wordless, forbidden. Still, he never broke the silence. Not even when their fingertips brushed for longer than they should have. Not even when he began to linger after dressing, pretending to fix his collar, hoping for boss, and what a glance, a gesture, anything. One Thursday, Daniel brought a bottle of water with him. He placed it gently on the nightstand as he left. The next week, it was gone, but nothing else had changed. Their rituals were careful, predictable, safe, until Daniel realized he didn't want safety anymore. He wanted to ask Jay what his favorite book was. He wanted to know if he had a duisa, a family, a job. He wanted to say, "You can talk to me," but he never did. The silence between them was the contract, the unspoken rule. The thing that protected them both, and the very thing that was breaking Daniel's heart from the inside. At home, Elaine asked him one night, "Do you feel distant lately?" Daniel said. "Work's been heavy." She kissed his cheek and didn't press. But Daniel wrote in his journal that night, "If I died tomorrow, Jay wouldn't know my name. And I don't even know if that hurts more or less." It was raining that morning, not the kind that howls and shakes the trees, but the soft kind, the quiet drizzle that makes everything feel like a memory. Daniel noticed it as he backed the car out of the driveway, glancing at the windows, half expecting Elaine to call out that he'd forgotten something. But she didn't. She hadn't for months. The drive to the Valley Inn felt longer that day. He didn't play the radio. He didn't rehearse excuses in his head for where he had been, like he used to. His hands were cold on the steering wheel. For a moment, he imagined Jay already waiting in room 216, sitting on the edge of the bed, thumb tucked inside a book, maybe glancing out the window at the rain. But when Daniel opened the motel room door, it was empty. The bed was made, lights off, no signs of life, just the faint smell of detergent and the same clock ticking softly on the nightstand. He stood there for a while, unsure if he'd arrived too early or too late. He sat down, checked his phone, waited. Half an hour passed, then an hour. Nothing. He walked out into the hallway, checked the parking lot. No familiar car, no sign of anyone arriving. The rain had stopped, but a heaviness clung to the air. Daniel left without locking the door. He didn't look back. At home, Elaine was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. She smiled at him. "You're home early," she said. He nodded, muttered something about meetings being canceled. She didn't question it, but that night as they lay in bed, she reached for his hand beneath the sheets. He didn't pull away, but he didn't hold her back, either. He dreamed of room 216, but this time, it was empty in the dream, too. The following Thursday, Daniel returned to the motel. Same time, same room. Still no one. The bottle of water he'd left weeks before had returned, still unopened, sitting neatly on the nightstand. He stared at it for a long time, wondering who had placed it there. Wondering if Jay had come at a different hour. Wondering if they had missed each other by minutes. By the third week, Daniel started to unravel. He called in sick from work, sat in his car outside the motel for hours, walked the block repeatedly, asked the front desk, casually, if anyone else had checked into room 216 recently. The receptionist shrugged. No names, just Kairu. She didn't remember faces. Daniel stopped eating their dinner. Elaine noticed. "You've been somewhere else lately," she said one evening. "Not just tired, somewhere far." He forced a smile. "I've just been thinking." "About what?" Daniel looked at her, and for the first time in years, his expression softened into something unguarded. "Do you ever feel like there's a part of you that lives somewhere else that no one knows about?" Elaine paused. "No," she said, "but I think you do." That night, Daniel opened his journal and wrote 3 words, "He's not coming." He stayed up late, going through old entries, reading every quiet moment he'd captured, the way Jay adjusted the lamp, the scar on his wrist, the way he sat slightly turned toward the door. Always. He began to doubt if any of it had meant anything to the man at all. But then he remembered a Thursday months ago, when Daniel had arrived soaking wet from a sudden summer storm. Jay had handed him a towel, already pulled from the rack. No words, just a gesture. Simple, intimate. Daniel had forgotten about that. But now it burned in his memory like a match. The ache of not knowing grew heavier with each passing day. Not knowing if Jay had decided to stop coming. Not knowing if he was hurt, or sick, or gone. Not knowing if what they had, if it could even be called anything, was real, or just a shared silence that only Daniel had taken seriously. The last Thursday of that month, Daniel sat alone in the room 216 with the journal open on his lap, a blank page in front of him. He didn't know what to write. Every word he tried felt too loud for the quiet they had shared. He closed it gently, placed it back into his bag, and turned off the lamp. He walked to the window, pulled the curtain back, and stared out into the overcast afternoon. He whispered one sentence, just once, to no one. "Where did you go?" And the silence that answered was colder than anything he had ever felt before. Daniel didn't find the name by searching. He wasn't looking. By that point, he'd accepted the unanswered question would linger like smoke, something he'd never quite touch but couldn't stop breathing in. It had been nearly a month since the last time he saw room 216. A month since the bottle of water had remained unopened. A month since he'd last written in the journal that now sat untouched in his desk drawer, beneath old receipts and tangled chargers. It happened on a Tuesday. He was scrolling through the news on his phone in bed while Elaine read next to him. A quiet moment, unremarkable, until the words stopped him cold. Jonathan Reeves, 46, passed away in a car accident on March 3rd. He is survived by his wife, 2 children, and his colleagues at Phoenix Mutual Insurance. There was a photo. It wasn't high resolution, just a small headshot beside the obituary. But it was him, the man from room 216. Jay, same eyes, same jaw, same quiet. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He felt like someone had punched through his chest without touching his skin. Elaine was speaking to him, but the words didn't reach. All he could hear was the rain on the windows and the sound of his own heartbeat rising like panic. He locked his phone, put it face down, and stared at the ceiling for hours after the lights went off. His mind reeled. Jonathan, he had a name and a family. And now he was gone. Daniel called in sick the next morning. He didn't plan it, but his car somehow found its way toward the funeral home listed in the notice. The service had already passed, but the building remained quiet, like it had absorbed too much sorrow and needed time to breathe. Inside, he asked if there was a public memorial display. The woman at the desk nodded, pointing to a small side room. It was empty when he entered. The lights were dim. On a long table covered in gray velvet sat a few framed photos, floral arrangements, and a guest book left open. Daniel scanned the photos. One showed Jonathan with his wife, a petite woman with bright eyes and 2 children, both teenagers. Another captured him smiling at what looked like a company picnic, a paper plate in hand, mid-laugh. Then, further down the table, a small acrylic stand held personal items retrieved after the accident, a watch, a pen, a book, and a wallet. Daniel moved closer, heart hammering. Behind the clear plastic flap inside the wallet, there were 2 photos, one of Jonathan's family, the other, Daniel's own face, a candid photo taken from across a room. He was standing by a motel window, sunlight on his shoulders, back slightly turned. It was room 216. He hadn't known it was taken. He hadn't known it existed. And yet, it was there, not crumpled, not hidden, slid into the wallet beside a wedding photo, preserved. His knees nearly gave out. He stepped back, trembling. He didn't cry. He couldn't. The grief wasn't clean. It was tangled in shame, disbelief, longing, and something cruelly close to love. All this time, Daniel had convinced himself that Jay was a mirror, a space, a stranger. But Jonathan had carried him, literally, quietly, in a place meant for precious things. Daniel signed the guest book with shaking hands, just his first name, nothing more. Later, he sat in the parking lot and tried to call himself back to the life he still had. Elaine would be home. She'd ask where he'd been. He'd have no answer. The silence Jonathan left behind was heavier than all the words they'd never said. That night, Daniel took the journal from the drawer and opened to the last blank page. He wrote without stopping. Your name was Jonathan, and now I know that, but I also know this, the silence wasn't emptiness. It was your way of speaking. I saw myself in you because you never asked me to be anyone else. I never got to thank you. I never got to say goodbye, but you kept a piece of me. And now I will keep a piece of you. He closed the journal and held it against his chest like it might still be warm. There were no more Thursdays, but there was still something left to do. Daniel stood in front of room 216 one final time. The door looked the same, faded green paint, worn edges, a scratch beneath the number as if someone had once tried to claw it open from the inside. It was quiet, as always. The parking lot behind him empty. The air carried the heaviness of approaching summer thick. Slow, unmoving. He unlocked the door. The key turned easily. No resistance. The room had been cleaned. Reset. The bedspread was taut. The nightstand lamp angled slightly away from the headboard, exactly how Jonathan had always left it. That small, unnecessary detail made Daniel's hands shake. He sat on the edge of the bed, the journal beside him. This time, he didn't open it to write. He didn't need more pages. What needed to be said had already been carved in silence. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and removed a photo, the same one he'd seen inside the wallet. His own image, unknowingly captured. He had printed a copy, framed it in something simple. The frame was wooden, raw, no varnish, just enough weight to keep it from feeling temporary. He placed it gently on the nightstand. Then he took out the journal, pages worn at the edges, dozens filled with ink and longing. He set it beside the frame, adjusted them until they sat straight, until they looked like they belonged there. And finally he spoke, out loud, to the walls that had held him, to the air that still remembered their rhythm, to the man who was no longer coming. I didn't know your name, but you knew mine. Maybe not how to say it, but you carried it anyway. He paused, breathing through the tightness in his chest. I used to think what we did here was only physical, a need, an escape. But now I know this room was the only place I was ever quiet enough to hear who I really was. His voice broke. You never asked me to change. You never even asked me to explain. And I hated that, because it meant I had no excuse left to lie. He stood, looked out the window, just as Jonathan used to. There was nothing special outside, just a row of tired trees and a traffic light blinking red through the branches. But I need to let you go now. I need to live without the hiding, without the hunger for something I don't even have words for. He turned back toward the bed. Thank you for giving me a place to exist, even if it was borrowed, even if it was silent. Daniel stepped out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him. He didn't cry. He drove home without turning on the radio. The streets looked the same, but his hands on the steering wheel no longer trembled. At home, Elaine was folding laundry on the couch. She looked up. You're late, she said gently. Daniel walked over, sat beside her. He didn't look away. I need to tell you something, he said. And for the first time, he did. He didn't tell her everything. Not all at once, but enough. Elaine sat still as he spoke, her face unreadable, her breath steady. She asked only one question. Did it ever stop you from loving me? No, he said. It just stopped me from loving myself. She didn't speak for a long time after that. Then she reached over and held his hand. That night, for the first time in years, Daniel didn't dream of room 216. He dreamed of open fields, of wind, of a voice he'd never heard, whispering his name like it was something worth saying. Have you ever loved someone without ever speaking a word, or maybe, has someone ever held your truth when you couldn't even hold it yourself? If this story found something buried deep in you, stay with us. Because here at Heart Stories, we believe silence is never empty. And sometimes the quietest stories echo the loudest.